As we get closer to the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we'll begin to see content that remembers the events and even some that attempts to shed new light. The Netflix docuseries Turning Point, 9/11 and the War on Terror is one that attempts to both remember and bring new light. But is it effective? The September 11th attacks changed the world in ways that have taken decades to understand. 20 years later, following the longest war in American history, and with Afghanistan once again under Taliban control, Turning Point, 9/11 and the War on Terror is an illuminating chronicle of the 9/11 attacks and how those events changed the course of history. Okay, so I don't think I have to say this, but I'm going to anyway. The series is really emotionally tough to watch. There are 5 episodes that are each around an hour long, and they show some very gritty footage and imagery. The first 2 episodes really focus on this September 11th attacks, with interviews from people who were on the scene in the different attack locations. It is powerful to watch these people relive their stories. It's also very heartbreaking and really does bring a flood of memories from that day. The documentary doesn't go into conspiracy theories or drift from the narrative of telling the events almost like a news story. It chronicles what people were doing that morning and then interweaves camera footage from news sources as well as amateur video. Watching those first 2 episodes was sort of like watching the opening sequence to Saving Private Ryan. I felt like I was barely breathing. It is so visceral to watch again. From there, though, the documentary takes a look at Afghanistan and how the US got involved there. The history lesson that this series provides was certainly eye-opening, as I wasn't aware of all the geopolitical issues and dealings that have been taking place since the late 70s. From that perspective, this series does a phenomenal job at introducing this historical perspective. As we learn more and more about Afghanistan and the US involvement, the show also takes us back and forth in the timeline to give us perspective on things happening inside the US at the same time. Now, one thing I found disgusting, or at least really stupid, was the finger pointing that was going on between FBI and CIA interviewees. They're going back and forth about how if one agency would have told the other about certain events, then maybe something could have been done to prevent the attacks. They're all arguing about what might have been if something had been done in the past. Instead of doing this and arguing about something you can't change, how about y'all focus on the present and the future? That's a novel idea right there. This series will require endurance to watch. The content is very compelling, and the way all the information is presented is intriguing, but it's so dense and there's a lot of it. I binged over 2 days, mostly because I wanted to get my review to you when it first came out, but I do wish I could have spaced out the viewings just some more to give my head and then my heart a break. As the episodes progress, the show takes us more and more into the present, which becomes almost scary as the words from past decades about visions for the war in Afghanistan and the goals there begin to sound very familiar, as if they've been on repeat from generation to generation. The whole series is compiled very well. The amount of footage is vast, and it's edited together, combining news and archival footage with a surprising amount of interviews. The interviewees include officials from multiple US presidential administrations, former CIA and FBI members, like I said, US military vets, as well as Afghanistan National Army soldiers, Taliban commanders, and members of the Afghan government, warlords, and even Afghan civilians. The interviews are extremely well curated and very informative. The filmmakers didn't grab just some random media pundits, but instead were able to secure individuals with real working knowledge of situations. Whether there were soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan, presidential advisors, and even generals, the accounts they provide are well-spoken and, more importantly, well-informed without a lot of political posturing. There still is some. The ability to get Afghan leaders to speak on an American-made documentary I thought was really impressive. I liked hearing their perspectives also, just to give us a more rounded narrative. Now, I get that this may not be at the top of everybody's viewing list. Not only is it incredibly sad to rehash so many of the events in such brutal detail, the weight of what came next and endured for 2 decades is also very daunting. While this may have some politically leaning bias, I didn't find it obvious. The series takes a look at all of the actions over several presidential administrations, all of which had shortcomings and failures when it came to the war on terror. I felt it was more condemning overall of just the war in Afghanistan due to the futility of the outcome rather than any particular administration. So overall, this is a well-crafted docuseries with an immense amount of footage that builds a compelling but daunting narrative. The interviews are informative, and I found the whole series to be especially enlightening as a history lesson. I think for anybody that is unfamiliar with the ins and outs of the war in Afghanistan, this will provide a great geopolitical lesson that not only informs of the past, but covers events right up to the present. Be warned though that this is tough to watch, as there are many unflinching depictions of violence that are going to probably turn your stomach, and they're not just constrained to the first couple of episodes. There's no sex or nudity, but some profanity and a ton of horrible violence. I highly recommend checking out Turning Point, 9/11 and the War on Terror. Do you enjoy documentaries? What types are you drawn to if you do watch them? I'd love to know, so it helps to show me what genres to keep as a priority for you. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.